This Veterans History Project interview is with Brigadier General Jack Haley, United States Army retired, on November the 7th, 2024, at the Association of the United States Army in Arlington, Virginia. General Haley, to begin, thank you very much for your many years of service to our nation, to the Army.
Thanks, Mark.
And how many years did you serve in our Army? And what rank and what position of responsibility did you retire, please?
I served 30 years, 2 months, and retired as a Brigadier General out of Joint Base Lewis McChord.
Thank you. And would you please share with us a little bit about your childhood, your parents, the schools and colleges you attended, and what led you to decide to serve in the Army?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I was born in Michigan, Detroit. My dad was going to Wayne State University, and he transferred to Michigan after his sophomore year. So we moved as a baby. I moved to Ann Arbor and spent 2 years while my dad graduated from University of Michigan, and been a lifelong Michigan Wolverines fan since then. We then moved to Princeton, New Jersey, where he went to graduate school and got his PhD in chemistry.
Wow.
Yeah, really, really brilliant man. Has over like 85 patents as a research chemist. And then we moved to Rochester, New York. So my earliest memories were on Princeton on campus, riding my big wheel around campus because we lived in graduate school housing. But then we moved to Rochester. My dad was a Kodak man, Kodak Park there, 30-year Kodak man. And that's pretty much where, I grew up. Went to, the rest of elementary school and junior high and high school, Fairport High School right outside of Rochester. I was a track and football guy all through junior high and high school, and then went on to St. Lawrence University in upstate New York, where I still competed on the track team for a couple years, and then either I lost interest or the team lost interest in me, one of the two. But my parents did not serve in the Army. My grandparents did not serve. Really, my grandfather was in like an ROTC program in like the 1920s. But other than that, really no prior military service in the Haley family. And it's interesting how I came to the Army.
Right.
It really was a financial decision for me. So I'm at St. Lawrence my freshman year, and my dad, obviously you heard his background. He knows
Yes.
a little bit about, higher education and universities. And my dad was always going to fund my undergraduate education. He always said, I'll pay for your undergraduate. So Parents' Day weekend, my freshman year at St. Lawrence, my dad comes up and instead of visiting me, he schedules interviews with all of my professors.
Wow.
And goes around and interviews them. At the end of Parents' Weekend, he's like, look, son, I told you I'd pay for your undergraduate, and I will, just not at this school. It's not worth my money. And, based on, he'd go, and he interviewed him. He's like, when's the last time you published? He's like getting, he did his research on the faculty at St. Lawrence. And, I'd been there. I chose that school. I wanted to go to that school. Already was kind of established, was pole vaulting on the track team. So I was like, okay, Dad, I'll figure out a way to pay for it. And so, of course, been there, 2 months or so, couldn't go back and say, hey, give me an academic, scholarship. But the ROTC department was like, come on down. They were like, come on down. And almost on the spot, they gave me a 3.5-year scholarship. So I just basically walked into that scholarship. Mar, I would tell you, I didn't really know what I had done. I didn't know really what I had signed at the time, and I was the absolute worst ROTC cadet in St. Lawrence history, I think. Probably the only one that made general officer. I'd have to go back and check that. But I didn't really, I was looking for money. I didn't know what I had really done and so I didn't really pay much attention to drill. I was dating my wife at the time, Jennifer. She was going to a nearby school across town, Canton, one of the state schools. And she'd come over and be looking through my, duffel bag of Army equipment. She'd be like, oh, this is cool. I'll take this field jacket, and I'll wear, around. I'll be a cool, woman around campus. So yeah, I was on probably double secret probation, the whole time I was at ROTC until in between your junior and senior year in ROTC, you go to what then was called advanced camp. It's basic training, it's leadership training. You're in leadership positions and you get graded on those leadership positions. Well, this dirtbag cadet from St. Lawrence, I ended up getting the top score and out of that advanced camp. So when I got there, it was like, I kind of like this. This isn't so bad. I enjoy this, especially the leadership positions when you were, the platoon leader or the platoon sergeant. So, you would have thought that then I would have been in the good graces, of the ROTC cadre at St. Lawrence, but no, it's actually even worse, because I wasn't one of their pet rocks, so this dirtbag had come back with the top score. But what it did allow me to do is it gave me a choice, really, if I wanted to serve on active duty or go into the reserves, following graduation. And at that point, I really didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I wanted to do after college. So I said, I'm going to go on active duty. It's a 4-year commitment versus the 8-year commitment that the reserves would be. So, so people ask me all the time, how did you end up in the Army? And I give all the credit to my dad, but not in the normal sense, right? It's not my dad pushing me to go in the Army. It was in fact, my dad, I call him, I call him this all the time. So if he's checking the tapes, he won't be surprised. I said, Dad, you were a Vietnam draft dodger, and it kind of was only because he had me and he was in college, right? So, he wasn't, consciously drafting or dodging the draft, but yeah, so that's how I ended up in the Army was my dad.
And would you tell us, please, a bit about the process you went through to select your specialty in the Army and your initial Army training and how that worked out for you, and then your first assignment in the Army?
Yeah, so so when you get ready for graduation, you go into a branch selection and you can order, put your order of preference in by branch. And I wanted to fly helicopters is what I wanted to do in the Army, but terrible eyesight, so wasn't able to pass the flight physical. So then it was like, okay, what's next? So ROTC, unlike the academies, unlike West Point or the Naval Academy or Air Force Academy, does not really do a great job in letting what's next in the Army. The academies do a much better job than the ROTC. That's something that we can talk about later. That I'd like to see what we can do here at the association to help. So I really didn't know what to do after aviation. I was like, well, I thought of myself as a smart guy. I'm like, yeah, maybe military intelligence. It's got intelligence in the word. So MI, I think, was number 2. And then field artillery was number 3. Just, again, not really understanding, what it meant. It's like just kind of going through and picking. And ordnance was number 4.
Okay.
And it was really more of the explosive ordnance disposal. The bomb squad guys. And as and then I don't recall what the rest were. The rest of the choices. And that's what I ended up getting, branched ordnance. At the time, the basic course for officers for ordnance was at Aberdeen, proving ground in Maryland. So I went off to Aberdeen. I'd just gotten married to Jennifer, who probably still had my field jacket, from ROTC.
Very good.
And we went off. Well, I finished the basic course, and then she joined me in our first assignment, which was in Germany. So, did I miss anything there?
That was terrific.
Yeah.
And tell us about your first assignment, please, and
Yeah.
a little bit about your non-commissioned officers and your initial stages of leadership development, shall we say, because you mentioned during the ROTC summer camp how you enjoyed the opportunities to be a leader. And so then now as a second lieutenant, you are a leader. So talk us through that a little bit, please, if you would.
Yeah, again, back to ROTC. So I showed up to OBC, in your reporting uniform, and I was in our old, the green Class A's with a garrison cap. I had the warrant officer garrison cap, So I'm like trucking on in, to the court, billeting to sign in, and luckily an NCO pulled me aside and said, "Hey, sir, you're wearing a warrant officer cap, because it's got
Yeah.
the silver braid on
Right.
it instead of the
Versus
gold
gold.
braid, So again, not to ding ROTC too much, but honestly, and a lot of it was on me, right? Again, being the worst cadet in the history of St. Lawrence, but so once I got into the basic course, I was with peers, and it was a full-on mission for me. And then the first assignment in Germany was like a gift. I mean, this was the late '80s, right? So, this was Germany was really the focus of kind of our
Cold War
national
years.
security,
Yes.
Cold
Right.
War
Looking at
years.
the Soviet Union.
Yeah. So we go off to Germany, and we had no kids. We'd just gotten married. I was in a non-divisional assignment. I was actually assigned, my first duty assignment in the Army was to a depot, General Support Center, Germersheim. Now, so again, I'm like, my career's over before it even starts. What's a second lieutenant going to be doing in a depot? But non-divisional assignment, no kids, in Germany, just married. It was like a 4-year honeymoon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jen and I, every weekend we were traveling. I mean, we made the most of it and had a blast. And on the professional side, where I thought it was going to be a career ender before it started, it was actually a really, really good assignment. And I met really my first boss in the Army, Tim Kleppinger. He retired as a colonel, was just recently working for IBM. But Tim Kleppinger, he was a captain at the time, field artillery captain. He actually made up for those lost years of ROTC training that I blew off. So actually going to a depot, with not a lot, I didn't have a lot of soldiers under my command. I mean, I was the S23 for the depot. So I had a platoon, NCOIC, and then I had about 45 German local national guards, gate guards. And that was my first platoon, but it allowed me really to learn my craft, learn more about the Army, and I really give Tim Kleppinger all the credit, for bringing me along. I mean, he was just a really, really good boss. Lieutenant would come in, report to the captain in the morning. He'd give me the long yellow legal pad sheet of the to-do things for that day, and I would just go through, man, and knock those off. And the deal was, at the end of the day, I report back to him with my to-do list and a 6-pack of beer. And we would sit in his office, and drink a beer and go through the checklist. And I'm like, this Army stuff's okay. You're living in Europe, we're traveling. It was a really good work environment. So I ended up, but they knew I had to go to a platoon, to soldiers. Everyone recognized that. So I was really only there less than a year, about 10 months, and then transferred to a maintenance platoon in a maintenance company in Pirmasens, Germany. And that's where I did my platoon leader time. Had my first platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Azuji, from Nigeria, and had a lot of warrant officers. I mean, maintenance company, got a lot of warrant officers. So that was interesting too, brand new second lieutenant. And I always looked young. I looked like a baby, as a second lieutenant. I could imagine what these old grizzled warrant officers were thinking. But working with warrant officers, working with those NCOs, which is so key in the maintenance field and the Ordnance Corps, was really helpful. Stayed in that company, moved up to shop officer, which as an ordnance lieutenant is, the job to have. So you're responsible for all the maintenance, for your customers of your unit, and really enjoy it. I would say as a lieutenant, that was my favorite job, shop office. And I learned some good leadership lessons there. Had a kid that was my shop supply clerk. Specialist, spoke fluent German. And so he was the unit scrounger, right? So we'd give him a TMP vehicle, the Volkswagen, those old Volkswagen pickup trucks.
Yes.
And he would bomb around Germany all day long, just getting parts, you know, and going to the depot I worked at, going to other depots, and he would come back with that truck fully loaded of parts. And he did more. That one specialist, Kenyon, he did more for the readiness of our supported units than any one individual. So as shop officer, you're kind of the senior lieutenant, so you're dual-hatted as XO. So the company commander was on leave when Kenyon was getting ready to ETS. He was getting out. He was going to stay in Germany, work at the Mercedes plant. So the question was, his ETS award. Well, Kenyon was overweight. Couldn't pass a PT test.
All those days spent driving in the
Volkswagen. But again, he did more for the readiness of every unit. So I was like, so commander's on leave, I'm acting commander, and I'm like, do I put Kenyon in for a ETS award, and so it would have to go up to the battalion commander, but the S1 of the battalion was my predecessor in the job as shop officer. So Kenyon had to work for her. So I'm like, maybe you can slide this through. So as I look back at it, a lot of people ask me, what are some of the mistakes you made, and I look back at that as kind of that was a moral test, right? What do I do? Do I do the right thing and not give him the award because he didn't meet Army regulations, or do we give him an award for the what he did for everything? So anyway, battalion commander signed it. It was an AAM, right? It wasn't, a huge award, but it was something. And so we gave Kenyon an AAM. Somehow, and then I left. I left the shop office and I went up to Kaiserslautern, and I was the aide de camp for the 21st TSC as a senior first lieutenant. And I run into my old company commander in the gym one day, and he's like, "You son of a gun!" He's like, when I was on leave, did you put Kenyon in for an award? And, of course, I had to come, I came clean, like, yeah, so he did so much for this and that. And so, he chewed my butt and we moved on. But, it was probably one of the early leadership lessons I learned, and honestly, if I was put in that position again, I don't know if I would have made a different decision.
Right.
It seemed like the right thing to do, even though it contradicted Army regulations. So that was my first 4 years in the Army in Germany. Just tremendous assignments, tremendous experience, and that definitely led me to continue. It wasn't the deal sealer that said, this is a career for me at this point. But it said, let's go, because I was getting close to my 4-year commitment. And if I went to the advanced course, the next educational event, then I would, obviously have to commit, I think, for another 2 years. So we did that, and so we came back, and I actually went to the very first combined logistics officer advanced course, where they combined quartermaster, transportation, and ordnance into one course at what was Fort Lee, now Fort Greg Adams. So that was my entry into the Army.
And please explain what came next then.
Yeah. So the advanced course, where I met another one of my mentors. He was my small group instructor, Darrell Williams. He's a retired 3-star, not the General Williams that's in charge of U.S. Army Europe now, but the 3-star Darrell Williams that just retired out of Defense Logistics Agency,
yes, sir.
DLA. He was my small group instructor, and I tell you, he taught me more about briefing, how to properly brief, how to properly conduct a presentation, and he drilled us over and over again. He taught me more about briefing and being smooth, polished than anyone in the Army, and I give him credit for that to this day. So went through the advanced course, and then following the advanced course, we went out to Fort Lewis, which is now Joint Base Lewis McChord, and I was put on the first Corps staff in the G4 as the maintenance officer, which was a lieutenant colonel position on the Corps staff that they didn't have filled. So I was a junior captain filling a lieutenant colonel position, but I was the junior guy on the Corps G4. But the phenomenal job, we did tons of division warfighters. So the Corps staff would travel around. At that time we had 6ID up in Alaska.
Okay.
We'd go up to Alaska and do a division warfighter. We'd go out to Hawaii to 25th. So we were always doing division warfighters. And because I was a junior guy, I was always the night shift guy, on the Corps G4 staff. So but the thing about it was traveling to all these different places and being on the night shift, I was free during the days. And so I would, again, get a chance to experience Alaska, Fairbanks in February, 52 below zero, Hawaii. Korea, multiple exercises in Korea, team spirit, ultra-focus lens. All of those, I think, they help prepare me as a logistician by observation of, kind of the more senior logisticians briefing the Corps commander. And one thing I realized was that, logisticians have always had a bad rap of kind of sitting in the back corner, doing their log estimate, not really engaging with, either the division or the Corps leadership. And it always bothered me, especially when the division planners or the Corps planners were planning something that was not logistically supportable. And it was really a gauge for me of the type of logistics officer, the one that would not say anything. And, these were exercises at the time. And, potentially let the exercise fail. Or those that would stand up to the Corps commander. I mean, these are, as a major or lieutenant colonel standing up to a 3-star.
Takes courage.
Yeah, and saying, sir, this plan is not supportable. So that's one takeaway I had from that whole experience, was that to have that kind of personal and professional courage, to do that. And then, at that time I was competing for company commands. So I got company command of 85th Maintenance Company. It was a GS, General Support Maintenance Company. So different, DS, GS, back when we had kind of different levels of maintenance. And it was a big company. It was about 300 soldiers. And that's where I fell in love with the Army. I mean, that's what sealed the deal for me, was company command. Up to that point, this was post Desert Storm. So we were going through that early 90s kind of voluntary drawdown.
Right.
They were offering money to year groups of officers to get out, and so I was year group 87. So, we were thinking about it, and it wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough that would kind of maybe tide you over.
Right.
So they did year group 85. I was a year group 87. And then they did year group 86. And then they're like, oh, we got enough, stop. So they never got to my year group. I'm not sure what I would have done. That was right before I took company command. So I might have taken that money and left the Army if they had offered it. But, at that point in time, then I had been selected for command. I was going into command. And that the leaders, leading soldiers, having the autonomy and the authorities, even as a company commander, which isn't a lot, right? But it's still, and just building a team is really what sold me for the rest of my career. And 85th Maintenance Company, like I said, it was GS Maintenance Company. So they do repair and return of reparables. So, we would fix engines, starters, generators, and return them to the supply system. Wouldn't go directly to a unit. They'd come to us, from the warehouse as a turn-in, in-op starter, come to my guys would fix it. Well, we were competing with the director of logistics there on posts, all the civilians, for doing that. So of course they didn't want to give us any work.
Right.
So I had a company of 300 soldiers with really no mission, and because the DOL civilians wouldn't give us anyone, because if they gave it to us, they would lose their jobs.
Right.
So we did everything but our wartime mission. We competed in everything, so the Commander's Cup, we won the Fort Lewis Commander's Cup because we could put a flag football team. I could carve it out, take the best of the breed, the best athletes in the company, set them aside. They would train, do that all day long. No one was going to be able to compete with us.
Right.
We won football. We won the cross country. We beat 10th First Special Forces Group in cross country, basketball, volley. So we ended up winning the entire Commander's Cup. Then we won the DA Maintenance Award. So we wanted a force com, or a core force com, and then we wanted DA. So I took troops from the motor pool back to the Pentagon to receive that award. We won the Conley Award, the Field Mess Conley Award, that evaluates your field mess. My peers hated me because, after every battalion run, they'd hand out the awards, and it was like 85th Maintenance Company, and I'd go trucking up, get the award, 85th Maintenance Company, and I was like, dude, I had no mission, I had to occupy these 300 soldiers. But unfortunately, I only commanded the company for 12 months because it was scheduled to inactivate, and the brigade commander at the time, the CSG, wanted to get one more command out of it, right?
Okay.
One more captain branch qualified. So I commanded it for 12 months. And then the lady that replaced me got about 4 months of commanding, and then they accelerated the inactivation, and they didn't get it. But that was the point where I was like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
And then what came next, please?
So the after company command, and a couple of key, well, at least one key leader, a guy named Brian Kozel, who was the battalion XO when I was a company commander, was a mentor, been a lifelong mentor, and he basically taught me a lot about professionalism and a lot about really how to manage programs. It was almost like he was like almost a program manager before PMP was a thing.
Right.
So I learned a ton from him. But following company command, I was selected to actually go back and serve on the DA Secretariat in, at that time, PERSCOM, before it turned to HRC. The DA Secretariat is the one who they run all the promotion boards.
Okay.
It's a very highly selective assignment, and very helpful in career progression, at least in terms of understanding how boards work, how promotion boards work, what are they looking for, that type of thing. So we packed up, we shipped our household goods to DC. We were looking for a place to live, and I get a call from my assignment officer. Says, hey, that DA Secretariat thing, you're the wrong flavor. Because the Secretariat is, I don't know if it's required to be, but they basically try to model the ethnicity of the Army, right? Okay. And so they basically needed a black female, to fill that position at the time, and I wasn't going to be able to pull that off. So I told I say, look, my household goods are en route, and you need to find me another job. So he found me a job, and honestly, to this day, it was the worst job I ever had in the Army.
Okay.
I was in desk plans, so Deputy Chief of Staff for Plans in PERSCOM, building what's called the PMAD, the Personal Management Authorization Document. So the PMAD is what MTOs pull off,
Right.
the TONEs pull off of. So literally, it was sitting in front of a computer 8 hours a day, just plugging in, working the PMAD. Oh my God, it was miserable. That's actually where I got my nickname, Jack, was in that job. Before that, I was John Haley. I wasn't even known as Jack. When I got to PERSCOM, we had about 8 captains all doing the PMAD thing. And I think of the 8, 6 of us were named John. So our boss was like, dude, you can't be John, you're Jack.
Okay.
Right? And it stuck. It stuck. So, it's really almost my alter ego, because my parents call me, everyone calls me John, but everyone that knows me in the military calls me Jack. But anyway, I was looking to get out of that job as quickly as I could. And I wanted to go up to Ordnance Branch. And so they pulled me up to Ordnance Branch, and I was the future readiness officer in the Ordnance Branch. So not doing assignments, which was nice. That's tough work. Doing assignments is, it's impossible to please everyone.
Right.
You got to have a special kind of, I think, personality to do assignments well. But the future readiness officer does scholarships. It reviews packets, ordnance packets for boards and that type of thing. Phenomenal career development, understanding kind of how things work at our personnel center was really great. And then from there, got selected to go to Command and General Staff College.
And you were a major at this time, or?
Yeah, I was a promotable captain.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Selected. I was selected. I was actually. I burned pretty fast. I was selected BZ to captain or to major, lieutenant colonel, and colonel.
Okay.
But, which honestly, it's easy for me to say because I was the benefit of those early promotions, but I'm not a big fan of early promotions. And I didn't realize that until really I was a colonel. And when I was competing for brigade command, my resume, my ORB, because I'd been promoted so early, I was like 2 jobs, less than my peers, because they had time to go do some of these key jobs that I just didn't have time to do because they kept promoting me. Again, not complaining, but in hindsight, so I did not get selected for brigade command my first look, which was the first time in my, at that time, 20 some years in the Army, where the Army told me, oh, not so fast, slow down, which was, took a little bit of a little hit on my pride at that point. But at the end of the day, I think it was those below the zone promotions. And for brigade command, boards have different board guidance that they get from the chief and the secretary. And I think they were looking for experience, on that. But I ended up getting picked up, the next look. So anyway, so CGSC, great year. All of my military education has been really great experiences from CAS Cubed. So they used to have a course called CAS Cubed. I thought, and it was for captains, supposed to be captains going into battalion staff positions, and it teaches them how to be a staff officer. I thought that was a tremendously, helpful class. But the Army ended up getting rid of it or absorbing it into I guess the captain's career course. But yeah, CGSC was everything that I expected it to be. I did not pursue my master's when I was there. I had, my second daughter had just been born. I was gonna, been going hard for about 10 years. I was gonna take a knee for that year, not do my master's, because at the time a master's degree was really not a criteria for for
sort of nice to do, but not essential yet.
Right. So coming out of CGSC, they sent me back to Germany. I was actually trying to go to Fort Hood or Fort Cavazos because you want to get branch qualified as a major as quickly as possible. So you want to, from my opinion was, let's go to a place where there's lots of jobs, right? So at that time, you had the Corps, you had two divisions, you had lots of opportunities. But anyway, the Army decided to send me back to Germany, and but luckily I went right into a branch qualifying job. So I was the 1st Infantry Division DISCOM S3 operations officer for the Division Support Command, and worked for my first female boss. So female brigade DISCOM commander, toughest boss I've ever had. Of all my bosses I've had in the Army, the 2 toughest were both female. Very interesting, just very demanding, and they, the DISCOM commander in 1ID was the first, female to command a heavy forward support battalion, first female to command a DISCOM, heavy DISCOM. She was kind of the Ann Dunwoody, but on the mech side.
Right.
Dunwoody, General Dunwoody, another one of my mentors, came up on the light side.
Okay.
But anyway, so Chris Drock was her name, and her nickname was the Dragon Lady. And she loved it. She had a dragon on her desk.
Okay.
She loved that. But she taught me a ton about division logistics. She ended up getting breast cancer while she was in command, had to leave early. And the reason I tell you that is that when she left to go back to, for treatment, the DISCOM XO and myself were running the DISCOM. They didn't put in another, commander. They did after a period of time, but talk about, so, we had 2 majors basically running a brigade in 1ID, and this was all during the kind of the ramp up to Kosovo. So DISCOM S3, then went down to a battalion, 701st, and was a support operations officer in that battalion. That after shop officer as a major, that was my favorite job as a major, was support ops. I liked it better than battalion XO, again, because it's the mission, right?
Right.
Had some great customers that we supported. Quarter Cav up in Schweinfurt, commanded by a guy named H.R. McMaster, who became a lifelong friend. And we spent a lot of time at Hohenfels in the training center down in Hohenfels, which was very helpful for my career, because as a junior officer, from second lieutenant to captain, I had spent all my time in non-divisional units, and then it flipped, did a 180, and from my major time really up to full colonel, it was all divisional assignments. So I felt pretty broadened, even as a major, that I had seen kind of multiple sides of the Army, to include, strategic at HRC. So then I moved from SPO to XO in the same battalion in the 701st, and was planning on, that would have been my last job in that 3-year tour. And then Branch called me and said, hey, we want to submit your packet to the White House to be the military aide to the vice president. And I was like, okay, sure, go ahead, submit it. And it goes through multiple paper looks, up to a certain level. And then if you make it through those looks, you get asked to come back to DC for an interview. So I came back for interviews and interviewed. At that point, it was the Clinton Gore administration, second administration. And so it was around 2000, because it was right before the 2000 election.
Okay.
So we interviewed with all the Gore staff, and then the 2000 election happened. Bush, won. Bush Cheney won, and I get called that, hey, you were selected. So at that point, it became a conversation with the incumbent military aide, who was someone who the Army knows well, Laura Richardson, who's now the Southcom commander. And Laura called me up and said, congratulations, you've been selected to replace me. When can you be here? This was like February. So my tour as XO was supposed to end in the summer. And I was like, well, Laura, I'd like to do, my full 12 months as XO and then, come in the summertime. There's this pause. And she's like, you might want to reconsider the position. So I was like, okay, Laura, when do you want me to come? So I ended up coming early. I had to leave the XO position early. But what a tremendous experience that was. So your official title really is you're the emergency action officer for the vice president. And you have a team of a White House communicator and a White House medical doc or nurse or PA, and you carry the football, which I can't talk about. Right. And you're with the VP 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's 5 of you, 1 from each service that does the job. And it was amazing. You wear civilian clothes, so I had to buy suits, and it was really an incredible experience, but very removed from the Army. The only time I saw, the Army was at the most senior levels, like the chief of staff of the Army would come over, to the White House, to cut an Army birthday cake or something. It was. So that bothered me a little bit, just that, I felt like I was away from the Army. But the experience, I was there over 9/11. The experiences of working at that, most senior strategic level was incredible. And lots of cocktail stories, it came out of that job, for another time. But that was my joint job. So, so I was supposed to do that for 3 years, but I was a promotable major and came out on the battalion command list. So I was able to leave after 2. And I commanded the 703rd. I took command of the 703rd Main Support Battalion, 3rd Infantry Division. And I took command in Iraq. This was OIF 1 from Steve Lyons, retired 4-star. And it was the last battalion change of command that the Army did deployed, because they realized it wasn't really a good idea, to change out in contact. Right. And it really wasn't the best. I was lucky. I came into the division as the G4 early during the deployment to Iraq, and so I was familiar with the division and all that. So I had an advantage. I wasn't coming in cold. But yeah, so we changed command in Dogwood, Iraq. Division commander, Buff Blunt, came down. I mean, we had a regular change of command that you would see at any post just out there in the desert. And then afterwards, the reception, this is a funny story. General Blunt had just outlawed eating on the economy in Iraq because troops were getting sick. And so my whole change of command reception was like, local hummus and sheep and goats, and pita bread and all that, local, phenomenal Iraqi food. And, when my battalion S4 came in and, told me what he had gotten, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get fired, on day one. So General Blunt and I were walking over to the little reception tent, and I'm like, oh no, here we go. I'm going to at least get my butt chewed or something.
Right.
He went in, filled his plate up, never said a word. so I ended up dodging that bullet. But I would tell you, battalion command was my favorite job in the Army.
Okay.
You're at that level, you're still very, very close to the soldiers, but you're commanding organizations now, right? You're commanding companies. You're not, that was, I think, just the sweet spot for me. I loved it, and luckily, because of deployments, I was able to command for 3 years, and actually convert the battalion from a main support battalion to what was the brand new modular brigade support battalion. So was able to do that, and so I feel like I had 2 different battalions, even though it was basically the same soldiers, but very, very different missions, right? From a main support battalion supporting the entire division and the division separates to a brigade support battalion, supporting 4th Brigade, 3ID. And another one of my mentors commanded that brigade, Ed Cardone, and retired 3-star. And he was an engineer. And so the division commander at the time, Fuzzy Webster, General Schoonmaker was the chief. Schoonmaker called Webster and said, you're standing up 4th Brigade. It's going to be the first modular brigade. You got your pick of colonels to command that brigade. Who do you want to command that brigade? And you would have thought he would have picked, combat arms, infantryman or a tanker or whatever. No, Webster picked Cardone, and it was the right pick. The guy's brilliant. And so as an engineer, he took command of a maneuver brigade.
How about
and deployed it back to Iraq. And that was probably my most challenging deployment because we ripped with 2 brigades. So we were 1 brigade from 3ID. We ripped with 2 brigades out of, 1 brigade out of 82nd, 1 brigade out of 1st Cav. And so my battalion, which normally runs, 1 ammunition supply point, 1 SSA. That's what we're manned to. We got 2 of everything. We got 2 SSAs, we got 2 ASPs, we had 2 different FOBs. So I had to split the battalion, and that was, talk about challenging. That was really challenging. Indeed. To be able to do that, and definitely, the deployments, deployments suck, right? It's you're away from your family, it's in, not the nicest of areas, right? You're not, you're living in the dirt. Food, this is well before, KB, we were just kind of starting to get KBR dining facilities and that type of thing in. But that being said, it was what we were, what I was trained to do.
Right.
And I was doing what I was trained to do, and most rewarding time I've ever had in the Army, even though it was away from my family and deployed.
Right. Speaking of Army families, would you now take a few moments to tell us about an Army family in your career? Clearly, there are challenges for Army families because of the service member being deployed or being on call, doing a lot of training. But there can also be some very fulfilling times for the families. So could you tell us a little bit about how that went for you and your family? Please.
It was so at that time, Jen and I, we had two girls, and first deployment, during Desert Storm, was really in northern Iraq. It was for Operation Provide Comfort, which was a humanitarian relief operation to the Kurds that Saddam had pushed up into the mountains. Another phenomenal experience. But the second Iraq, Jen and I we came into Stewart. I was basically there 3 days, drew my equipment and left.
Wow.
I mean, we hadn't even gotten our household goods. So Jen had to, take care of that with the girls, get the girls in school and all of that. And of the 3 years that I was there in battalion command at Stewart, I was at Stewart for 6 months of those 36. So I was deployed for 30 months out of the 36, which was not uncommon at that time. But talk about tough on a family, especially in battalion command, where Jen felt responsible for the families that were back there. And honestly, she had it worse than I did. I mean, in terms of, the calls at 3 a.m, and the Army always instructs us when you deploy, leave your best, guy or gal to be your rear D commander. Don't take your best with you. Leave your best behind, because that's where most of your challenges actually are going to be. And I did. I left my best company commander behind with my best first sergeant, and I was really glad that I did, because it was challenge. These were early on in the deployments, right? This was 2003 to 2006. So FRGs were pretty much dormant. We didn't really have active FRGs at that time. So and then the lack of communication, because we didn't have internet, when we were deployed. I mean, I didn't talk when we deployed to OIF-1. I didn't talk to my family for probably 2.5 months, which again was not uncommon. So I mean, that's tough on a family, but it also really, it does make, it makes your family resilient. If they're not already, they're going to be.
Yes,
right?
indeed.
They're going to get that way. And honestly, the moves, we moved 24 times over 30 years.
Wow.
My kids were probably part of at least 10 to 12 of those moves. Talk about different schools. My eldest was lucky; she only went to 2 different high schools, 2 years at Heidelberg, 2 years here in D.C. But my youngest, it was, at that point, I was a senior colonel, was getting looked at for 1 star. You can kind of start to plot your moves out, based on what you're gonna, what jobs you're gonna get.
Field's becoming more narrow.
Yeah, and it looked like she was gonna have to go to 4 high schools in 4 years, which we didn't really want her to do. The kids loved it. It was all an adventure, moving around, going to Europe, all over these places, until high school. And then in high school, it was, dig your heels in. I don't want to move anymore. I'm good here. So we actually decided to send our youngest to boarding school.
Okay.
And she went to a boarding school out in Tacoma, Washington, all girls boarding school. And the reason she wanted to. I mean, she really was asking to go there. That it made our decision earlier, because she's our little one, right? Sending her off, she's like 13 years old, putting her on a plane, flying by themselves, because we were in DC at the time. It was hard, but it gave her stability.
Yes.
She knew she was going to go to that school for 4 years and then, graduate and do whatever, she was going to do. And so, a lot of Army families have to make those decisions, whether they go, as a geo bachelor. So my last assignment in the Army, I was a geographic bachelor, because, not because of my daughter, actually I was closer to her because I was at Lewis McChord, but, because my wife had a job, and so spouse employment, incredibly difficult. I'm encouraged by, how the Army is approaching it and taking it seriously and trying to really help Army families and help spouse employment, and try to get some more stability in for our kids. But yeah, my kid, they're nothing but resilient. You can't phase them. They don't get upset at things. They're world travelers. So there's a lot of goodness that comes out of being an Army brat.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
Now, could you tell us about your brigade command, and then what came next after your brigade command, please?
Yeah. So. I mentioned I was passed over for brigade command at my first look, and my second look I was selected. But I was selected for a new brigade at the time, the Army Field Support Brigades, AFSBs. And man, I did not want to go command an AFSB. You know, I had commanded a divisional support battalion for 3 years, did all my major time in a division. I wanted to command a sustainment brigade.
Right.
You know, and honestly, you know, I look back at that, and the Army really did a good thing for me by sending me to an AFSB, because a sustainment brigade would have been easy and it would have been fun.
Mm-hmm.
But the AFSB was a new concept that basically bridges the tactical logistics to the strategic logistics, kind of puts this brigade in the center to tie those two levels together. And you're the synchronizer of acquisition, logistics, and technology for the theater that you support. So again, they sent me back to Germany. I was like, okay, you know, I mean, Germany's like home for me. So
Right.
my third trip back to Germany, and we were in Seckenheim, just outside of Heidelberg. We lived in Heidelberg. And the brigade has about 10 military, and the rest is all civilians, about 1,200 civilians. So again, that was my first experience of leading civilians, you know, not just leading soldiers.
Yes.
Well, I guess you could count those German guards way back when I was
Yes.
a second lieutenant, but I don't know if I don't think I was leading them. So it was, I was disappointed that I didn't get a sustainment brigade. But again, in hindsight, I learned so much more about the Army and strategic logistics than I ever would have in a sustainment brigade. And all the FSBs are up under Army Materiel Command. And prior to taking brigade command, I had to do my penance in the Pentagon.
Okay.
So I did a year on Army staff in the G4. In the G4, the Army at that time was Ann Dunwoody. And so I worked for Ann Dunwoody there for that year. Then I went off to command the brigade, and she went to AMC. So if I hadn't commanded an AFSB and I hadn't worked for Ann Dunwoody, she wouldn't have selected me to be her XO coming out of brigade command.
Right.
You know, so it's weird when you look back at these things, how those relationships really do matter.
Yes, indeed.
So yeah. Well, the other thing I learned in commanding an outfit like an AFSB, where you have a lot of civilians, and you have tremendous responsibility. I mean, you're responsible for all of the logistics in that theater, but you have like zero authority. You know, so commanding an organization with all that responsibility but no authority, it takes a completely different leadership style. You know, you're consensus building, right? You're building a team of teams, right? You know, because you can't do it yourself. You don't have the wherewithal to do it yourself. So that was probably the biggest lesson that I learned out of that brigade, was how to do that, how to command, and you know, accomplish your mission without having like the necessary authorities to do it, and building that, you know, consensus. So yeah, phenomenal experience. And you know, we ran the Army pre-positioned sites in Europe at the time. This was obviously, I mean, it's expanded. The brigade now has got probably twice the mission it has when I was there, because you know, we've expanded into Eastern Europe and the APS site in Poland. But I had the APS site in Italy, which was always fun to go visit those guys down in Livorno. They had a really good mission, and I had some good bosses. We were assigned to the 21st TSC as a brigade, but belonged to Army Sustainment Command back at Rock Island. So you know, Yves Fontaine, just a character, great, you know, mentor, and then Pat McQuistion was my boss. General McQuistion was my boss at 21st for a little bit. But yeah, following brigade command, like I said, you know, when I went to be Dunwoody's XO at AMC. AMC was still at Belvoir at the time, and we moved it from, you know, during my time as their XO, we moved to Huntsville to Redstone. So that was an operation.
I'm sure that was a big operation to move a 4-star headquarters.
It was
several hundred miles.
Yep, and you know, so you know, in those XO, you know, the XO to the 4-star positions, you know, they're called kingmakers, right? You know, most, I haven't done the math, but most of the folks that have those XO jobs go on to be general officers. So I thought I was tracking right along, ready to pin on that star. Well, I finished up my XO time, and because of some board scheduling things, I came out of the XO job and got passed over for 1-star. And you get multiple looks, but so I went back to General Dunwoody and I said, "Man, what's going on?" And she, not to probably divulge insider baseball too much, but she basically said, "You have time," and like, okay, because you're my sugar mama. I
Right.
mean, you have to have that champion,
Right.
on the general officer board, or you're not going to make it. So she said, "You have time." I'm like, okay. So she sent me I'd left my family up here because we PCS to Belvoir.
Right.
I left my family up here. So she said, "Why don't you go back, be with your family, and we'll stand up an office in the Pentagon,
For the ASUN type office.
an L&O office in the Pentagon," which I thought was going to be a miserable job, and ended up being pretty miserable. But General Dunwoody made it better by calling the chief, calling the vice, and saying, "Hey, Haley's my guy in the Pentagon. Let him in your meetings." So so I got the back seat pretty much, everything that she would have gone
Right.
to, which was a really great experience. But other than that, I was like the Maytag repairman, in the basement of the
Yes,
Pentagon,
yes.
So, but we do what the Army tells us to do, So so anyway, next year comes around, next BG board comes around, and she had retired. I'm like, well,
What's next?
there goes,
That's right.
there goes my sugar mama, So and I got passed over again. So I was like, okay. At that point, you realize, you've had a successful career, right? I've been about 24, 25 years or so.
And in a brigade, very successful.
Right, very successful. And I was okay with it. I was disappointed, but I had come to terms with the fact I didn't think I was going to get promoted. So then I started looking for that last job, right? That last 06 job you're going to have. And so I went out and interviewed with the first Corps commander at the time, General Bob Brown, to be his Corps G4. And he selected me to be his Corps G4. And, I was all excited to be going to that. It'd be my last job, and we love the area. And then I got promoted. I got picked up. So when I came home to tell my wife and kids, "Hey, guess what? I finally got, I got selected for Brigadier General," my kids were like, "Oh my God, do you have to take it?" Instead of like, "Woohoo, congratulations," they were like, "Oh my God."
Another move.
Another
Is that what
move.
they were thinking?
Right.
Yeah.
Another move. And I mean, they were obviously
Sure,
very
of
proud
course.
and all of that. But so we ended up going to Greg Adams, Fort Lee at the time, to be the chief of ordnance. Which, I mean, coming in as an ordnance officer, growing up as an ordnance officer, having known multiple chiefs of ordnance and worked for a lot of them, to go back and command your branch,
Right.
was ultimate,
Yes.
honor. It really was an honor. And I loved the job, because, I mean, you were working with AIT students, you had a couple thousand AIT students. We had tremendous facilities at Fort Greg Adams, because the home ordnance was always Aberdeen Proving Ground up in Maryland.
Okay.
And then when, due to BRAC, when they moved it to Fort Lee, I mean, it was teeth. It was the same when they moved, the Armor School to Benning, similar
Right.
reaction. But the Army spent about $800 million on new facilities at Fort Lee just for the ordnance campus. So, I mean, we had brand new classrooms, brand new maintenance facilities. And it's on an island kind of away from Fort Lee. It's like over a highway. So it's almost your own little separate base. And it was just a tremendous job. You're responsible for, working with, the CDID or futures guys and developing requirements. You're developing material, you're developing doctrine, you're developing organizations, and you're commanding, a training function. So love that job. Did it for 2 years. Just working with the BOLIC, the lieutenants, and the captains that were there at the career course, just phenomenal. And, so at the time, A good friend of mine, Kurt Ryan, was commanding the 593rd Expeditionary Sustainment Command out at JBLM as a new one-star. And I was at the ordnance school. Well, both of us, we were friends. We had talked. He really wanted his first job to be the ordnance school, and I really wanted my first job to be an ESC. So Kurt and I said, hey, let's start the campaign that you and I are going to, after we do our tour here, that we're going to swap. Not that we have any say, in the matter, but we're like, hey, we'll just start that rumor mill, and if enough people are talking about it, it's true. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but it happened. We after 2 years at the ordnance school, I went out to command the 593rd, and that was my last job in the Army. And I loved that job as well. It was, you were responsible for really all the Army logistics in the Corps, in First Corps, and in the Pacific. So spent a lot of time in the Indo-PACOM AOR, working with PACOM, J4, 8th TSC, lots of exercises, an opportunity to, travel Australia, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Thailand, all through that area. Was just tremendous experience. And so then you start getting looked at for 2-star, and got passed over. You can only serve as a 1-star for 5 years, and so it just didn't work out. Which honestly, I wouldn't say I'm bitter, because I had such a tremendous life experience in the Army, but I really felt I had more to offer. So it was certainly a disappointment not to get selected for 2-star. Especially, when the cut to 1-star is so tight, it's
Right.
like a percent, get selected, to 1-star. And then the 2-star, 1 to 2-star selection is around 49%. It's mandated by law. You can't promote more than 50% to 2-star. So you make that tough cut to 1-star, and then you get told no to 2-star, you're not in the top half. It was a little tough pill to swallow. But, so another one of my mentors, Gus Perna, came out and saw me at JBLM, knew I was not going to be a 2-star, and he gave me the best advice anyone could be like, don't look back. He says, just don't look back. Things happen for a reason. Move out, look forward, and it was really, really good advice. So yeah, that's pretty much my career in a nutshell.
Well, congratulations on having 2 commands as a brigadier general back to back.
Yeah.
That must have been very fulfilling and for you as
Absolutely.
an Army leader.
Yeah.
So as you look back on your service in the Army and your commands, could you talk to us a little bit about the leadership of your subordinates and what really impressed you with some of your junior leaders who were reporting to you during your career?
Yeah.
Their initiative and
Yeah.
courage.
Yeah, it was. I think in terms of leadership, one thing. I think any leader would tell you, a key to success is surround yourself with good people, right?
Yes.
And I would say that's not just luck. I would say most of our good leaders out there in the Army and in civilian world too are HR experts. Not the policy, but
Right.
in their head, capabilities, knowing people, that empathy, and understanding people, and being able to select, the best people to support you is a leader skill. And so I was able. I had great people around me, and that definitely owe all of that success to those folks. But a couple of them really do stand out, and it does get back to some of our tenets of leadership, in initiative, right? So when I was a battalion XO, you run the battalion staff.
Yes.
My battalion S4 was a young lady named Michelle Donahue. She's now a 2-star general commanding CASCOM, but she was so creative in terms of, give her a problem, whether it was a field problem or, we were going on a staff ride and it was just logistics or whatever the issue was, she would come up with solutions and actually, even be able to bring in material that you almost didn't want to ask the question, like, how did you do this? Because she was so effective and so creative. And I think, a good leader will will see that, and then give them that left and right limit, right? And then let them go, right? Again, mission command, in terms of understanding the intent and then empowering them to do it. Something General Bob Brown does better than anybody, and I learned a lot of that from him. But that was late in my career. I mean, I had observed that before. One kind of leadership challenge I had with a subordinate was in battalion command. I had a company commander who was, a rock star at mission accomplishment, but was bringing the company down. I mean, she was basically burning her troops out to get, the mission accomplished. Very, I wouldn't say toxic. She wasn't toxic, but she was my, I would go home and tell Jen, I said, she's my test case, right? This is going to be my leadership project. So if I can bring her away from the dark side, right, of leadership, where it's, very authoritarian, right? Do it or shut up, I'm in charge, and she was, kind of operating that way. And I spent a lot of time with her saying, really, it's better if they think it's their idea than your idea. You may not be the smartest person
Great
in the
advice.
room. You got a lot of smart, NCOs and lieutenants out there that may have some good ideas. You don't have them all. Just trying to bring her along. Because, from a mission aspect, she was knocking out of the park. She was accomplishing everything we gave her. But, the indicators were there in the company, in terms of morale and discipline, that it was having an effect on. So I spent a good year and a half, 2 years working on her. And, unfortunately, I don't think I was successful, but she ended up getting out as, I think, a major. But again, so there's kind of a negative side, to that of trying to bring your subordinates along.
But I think what you bring out too is reaching out, taking the initiative to help them, and then it's ultimately their responsibility.
Yeah, that's right.
But trying to coach, grow, develop your junior leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I had phenomenal company command, other company commanders as a battalion commander. Just incredible young officers. But I would say, definitely, some keys I think in helping them grow that are key to leading in any organization is listening to them, right?
Yes.
Being a good, it's amazing to me how many senior officers just don't listen, and even it's just so effective on both sides, right? One, they think they can understand that you're listening and that their voice is being heard and that their opinions matter. And two, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and I do want to hear good ideas. So being able to listen, I think, has been definitely a leadership trait that I would encourage in anyone. Building the team, trust, empowerment. Those are all key, leadership lessons that I've learned throughout my career that are timeless, right? And trust being the absolute bedrock. And I think I tell a lot of the best way, to lead an organization is by example, right? I think the best way to train your subordinates on good leadership is by your example. And so I've tried to do that throughout. There's other guys, my peers, that'll get up in front of a class, a group and give a presentation or a class on leadership, right? And it's all good, but then if they don't walk the walk, it's just PowerPoint slides. So I think setting that example, leading by example, I've always tried to do that. To the point where it's we were doing. I was a battalion XO. We were doing what's called a Mungadai. It's a training exercise. Mungadai was a training exercise that Genghis Khan used to do with his subordinates. It's sleep deprivation, and it's food deprivation. It's physically demanding, and then there's and so the idea is to get and this was with officers, was to get your officers tired, cold, wet, and then make a decision, right? Have to make a decision under those circumstances because that's what they're going to have to do. So we're on this exercise, and at the tail end, everyone gets captured. You know, it was all the lieutenants in the battalion. They all get captured, and we had the division counter intel guys set up a POW camp. It was kind of like a little mini SEER course, right? You know, so they came in, you know, burlap, but you know, sandbags over their head, flex cuffed, put them in flex pallets, these little tiny cages, you know, so they're in there. These guys went to town. I mean, they even went to the point where they were simulating urinating on the lieutenants, you know, where they had a bottle of Gatorade, you know, and they would like, you know, simulate, you know, and then squirt the spot, and they couldn't see, you know. So I mean, you know, so it was, and it was, and then they were put in kind of uncomfortable positions. Not torture, right? I mean, we're not torturing. I mean, these were professionals too that were doing it, the counter intel guys. But it was so, you know, I'm there as major, battalion commander. There we're all observing. You know, finally I was the point, sir, I can't take this anymore, man. I'm just going to have to go in there with them, you know, because it was like I couldn't stand to see these guys getting tooled on, you know, and we're just standing there watching. You know, so I just jumped in there, you know, got peed on, thrown in flex pallet, and and it, you know, ended up being really good training for these kids, understanding kind of, you know, and this was cursory, right? I mean, not even anything that they might, you know, that they would, but it would at least open their eyes to it. And probably more importantly, and I'm sure the battalion commander thought of this, it built that team. Oh, they came out of that, you know, stronger as a team together. And, you know, of course we culminated the event with a big, you know, barbecue. But, you know, I learned, you know, it was very difficult for me to watch that happen to my subordinates. And so the battalion was like, all right, knock yourself out, you know, jump in there, I don't care. But anyway.
Great leadership examples.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
So now, General Haley, you retired from the Army. You've had some senior level positions. You're now with the Association of the United States Army. Could you please highlight what you've done, what you're doing now, and the leadership examples from the Army that you carry and continue with you today in your work?
Yeah. So I retired in 2017, and you know, we're out of Fort, you know, Lewis, out of JBLM. Jen and I had a house here in Washington, so the plan pretty much always was we were to come back here and base out of here, and not necessarily retire here, but at least second career kind of started here. So we came back here, and I was starting to look for a job, and went down to Fort Greg Adams for an event and had dinner with another mentor of mine, Mitch Stevenson, retired 3-star. And Mitch said, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, you know, sir, I'm on terminal leave, you know, I'm up in DC. He's like, how'd you like to run an electronics company? And I was like, I would be interested in that. So, and honestly, that's how I ended up into my first job post-retirement. It's all about relationships and your reputation. Yes. And so this Miltope is the name of this company. It's down in Alabama. Had everything I was looking for in a post-Army career. It was like another command. You know, it was 125 employees. There's a manufacturing facility. Most of our work was with the Army, but not all of it. It had everything I was looking for. I mean, other than the fact that we really didn't want to live in Alabama. But we tried it. And so we moved down. The headquarters and manufacturing was in Montgomery. So I moved to Montgomery. Jen was a little reticent. She was like, I'll wait and see, you know, see how this looks. So she didn't move down until later. But it was, you know, it was a tremendous job. My board of directors was very hands off, you know, as long as I was, you know, doing the job, hitting numbers. We were owned by a company out of Singapore, which was kind of cool. You know, I was back and forth to Singapore a couple times a year. And it started out cool and then got real old, you know, after that 18-hour flight. But I found at Miltope that, and I had seen it before in the AFSB with a lot of civilians, is that civilians crave good leadership because they really don't get it a lot. And I'm not just talking about Department of the Army civilians. I mean, I'm talking about in the corporate America too. they don't really get a lot of good leadership or leadership development or someone that really cares about their development. And so a lot of almost all of the leadership lessons that I learned in the Army were translatable to commanding or leading, being the CEO of this electronics company. Other than, again, it's a more participative style than authoritative. It's again, building that consensus, pulling ideas out, letting them think, hey, that's a great idea. Why don't you, do that, execute that. And so I think it's craved, and it's certainly deserved. And so I didn't really, other than that, it's not, you can't go all sergeant major, on a civilian,
Right.
DA or corporate. It doesn't
Right.
work, right? They're not going to respond because they don't have to.
Right.
So definitely a more participative style I found was much more effective at the company. The thing that was hardest for me to understand was that people could quit. Because it's not in our DNA, right? That we, it's never quit is in our DNA. And so when my VP of HR would come in and say someone was quitting, I would be like, what? That's not authorized. I didn't say they could leave. So that was the hardest thing to kind of get used to. And then the other really hard thing to do was firing people. Again, as a leader in the military, your soldiers are everything, and your care for your soldiers are everything. And when I've had to relieve company commanders before, but it's not the same. They're still employed the next day. They're still in the Army. They may be out of a position. If they're relieved, they're probably not going to get promoted to the next rank. But that's years down the road.
Right. They have time.
Corporate America, man, it's escorts you to the door. And you're done. And I had to at Miltope, I had to fire my chief operating officer. I was there 3 months, and it's back to trust. I could not trust the guy. And then we had layoffs. It's kind of it's the corporate world, and it's an ebb and flow. It's it's deals, it's no deals. So we had some layoffs, and I tell you that really bothered me. That was the worst part about it. I don't know. Some guys can disconnect that, right? That aspect of it, but I never could. So. I ended up moving the company headquarters to Huntsville and our R&D to Huntsville. I left manufacturing in Montgomery, and Jen moved to Huntsville. She was okay. She was better with Huntsville. And we lived in Huntsville for almost 4 years. And then both our kids were up in this area in DC. So I was like, you know what? Jen wasn't happy. And we had always made the commitment, hey, you follow me around for the first 30, I'll, wherever you want to go, the next 30 is you. So, she wanted to move back here, and so we came back here, and so I quit. something that was really hard to do. I wrote a letter of resignation. I'm the chairman of my board was General retired John Tallelli, who didn't take that very well. He understood but so we came up here, didn't have a job, but I've always been an AUSA member since I was a second lieutenant. Obviously I had worked for General Brown, I had worked for General McQuistion, and so I just contacted General McQuistion and said, hey, I'd love to help you out. I'm here in town, whatever. I was thinking of, like voluntary so General McQuistion was going to bring me in as a contractor to help her build the National Partner Program, and then she retired. And so I was like, oh, well, that opportunity went away. And that's when General Brown reached out and said, hey, why don't you come on in and help me stand up the Center for Leadership? So I started doing that, and then transitioned into the vice president for meetings and membership here at AUSA. And I've been doing that for now 3 years, 3.5. So, and I tell you, I've always loved the organization, never really understood, the national headquarters part of it, obviously, other than, attending annual meetings and, seeing General Sullivan up there and running around behind General Sullivan. I didn't know who she was or any of that, but it's a tremendous organization, always been a part of it. But now to be able to come and work here and help lead the organization into the future is unbelievable. So, they always say a lot of times retired military will take 2 or 3 jobs, before one kind of sticks.
Yes.
And it took me 2, and this one stuck. As long as General Brown will keep me around, I don't plan on looking for another job. So
You will say a noble mission with noble work, right?
yeah, absolutely.
As you reflect back on your professional career, would you recommend young people today to consider joining the Army?
Yeah, absolutely, I would. And I talk to them all the time about it. And one of the things I lead off with is like, where else in the world, and what other job can you get paid to get up and work out every morning? Go shoot and blow stuff up and be part of an organization that has the moral compass and the ethics of an organization like the military, not just the Army, but the military. I was like, you can't find that anywhere else. And then you talk about the team and being that member of the team. I've always felt, a call to service, maybe not, but I've always felt at home in organizations where you're being part of something bigger, right? Whether I was a Boy Scout, didn't make Eagle, which is my, to this day, my mother's biggest disappointment, and she blames my wife because we started dating at the time, when I was getting ready to finish. I was my community project and 2 merit badges, and I had Eagle, and I was like, I'm not interested in that anymore. But being part of that, something bigger, I would definitely encourage young people to look at it. And I've never been, I think, a very good recruiter because I do. It's a personal decision. It's a deeply personal decision. I mean, to make that decision where you're going to join an organization where you could give your life, in support of that organization and its goals, is such a personal decision for me. I've not been a good recruiter in going out and trying to push it. I lay out the phenomenal benefits of the team and the enjoyable work experience and the ability to see things that you never would probably go see, in the civilian side around the world, and do something noble, So when you are sitting, on the porch in your rocking chair, and you're looking back on your life, like what did you do?
Yes.
You served, and that's you can't be more noble than being a servant. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I tried to get my oldest daughter was going to, applying to medical schools. And I was trying to get her to go to the Uniform Health Services College. Like it's such a good deal, to get that free, MD, well, not free. I mean, you serve 8 years or whatever the service is, but, no loans, you're not paying medical, malpractice insurance, at least while you're in the Army. But yeah, neither one of my kids was interested. I think, I say they're resilient, and they are, and they moved a ton. But I don't think that they wanted that for their families, which is I'm perfectly fine with. I was a little disappointed in the U-Shoes thing because, that was, that's a $200,000 decision there, but she made it herself, and she's dealing with those student loans right now. But yeah.
General Haley, thank you. This has been a terrific discussion. What concluding remarks would you like to make now?
I'd sign up again. If I would serve another 30 years, I still feel like I have something to offer the Army, and that's another reason why I'm here.
Yes.
At AUSA, it's because I think I can continue to serve in this role. But yeah, thanks, Mark. Great discussion.
General Haley, it has been a great pleasure and honor to interview you for this Veterans History Project. All the best to you, and thank you so much for your many years of service to the Army and to our nation.
Thanks, Mark.